Hey there. So, after my last share, where I unexpectedly delved into the process of me, what I referred to as going through hell to get to faith, and I had emotion there, right? And I didn't expect that because I didn't know I had that there. And that alerted me to something where I had some suppressed feelings that I hadn't dealt with yet. So since then, I've been working to find my way to clarity on what that is, where that's lodged, why it's there. I've had to go at it from a few different angles because it's just something that I very much hid from myself. And I realized it also in the recollection that I shared because, I simply just said in my recollection, in case you didn't see it, I talked about how I had been working with spirit very closely and being shown, this ability that I had to create my reality, to affect my reality, the power that I really have. Like I was experiencing direct messages, working directly with a shaman in my sleep state. I was feeling clarity on my intuition. I was being shown things that were, seemingly magical at the time. I was being shown energy medicine. And this is quantum healing. This means like that we're going into the quantum field and manipulating the energy that way in order to effect a healing on a 3D level. I was dissipating clouds with my intention. I was directing insects that came into my experience. I was having telepathic conversation with a rabbit that I had at the time. And I understand that from the outside that sounds really crazy, right? Like to someone who doesn't understand life from a bigger picture view, on a 3D level, that sounds pretty nutty, right? I get it. But like, these things are very real. The experiences were showing me a lot of things that I needed to know, right? So then I go back into dealing with people again, which is the 3D, and this was for the purpose of me digging up my old coping mechanisms that I had stored within me for navigating Earth amongst people, and dissecting them based on the principles that I now understood about magic and how we can make changes. But it wasn't always easy, right? Because there were packed in coping mechanisms that were like a Jenga tower based on real traumas that I experienced. And my logical mind had already created the story for myself on why it made sense to do it that way. So as I'm unpacking this, I'm looking back at the situations I was in and I'm just like, whoa, like looking back on my time when I was asked to go into a certain establishment, which was a bar, and I did readings there. It was a proper invitation for me because I was asked to do this based on the recognition of my talents. And however, there were people there who didn't recognize my talents, who were very suspicious of what I was doing. And when it hurt my feelings, one of my coping mechanisms was not to show that, to just like kind of bolster myself up into the knowings that I had before I got there. And so I wore a mask, but I didn't know I was wearing a mask. I thought I was just kind of giving myself a pep talk and saying, you know what you've been through, you know what you've been taught, you know your experiencing, and you know this is true. So just remember that. But what it might have looked like from outside was a bit of arrogance or something like that, because it was a mask. Because the reason why I was putting that forward wasn't because that wasn't all true, but it was because I was trying to hide a pain. I was trying to hide the fact that I felt very insecure based on being in the face of people who didn't understand me. And that was an earlier wound that I did not recognize in myself at all until now. I've actually recognized it a few months ago with my life coach, but I'm realizing now that there's more layers of it than I got to with my life coach. Because my life coach is great. When it happened between us, when I realized that something I'd been sharing with her wasn't congruent with her reality, I felt really hurt. And as a result, we ended up having a conversation where I shared that with her. Because I was already feeling comfortable with her enough to be vulnerable, because we had already built a rapport. And then based on that, we had a conversation, and that was good. But what didn't happen with that, it repaired our relationship, which was nice. Communication can do that. But what didn't happen was that I didn't get to the root cause of that as a wound for me. Right? I didn't understand what had created that situation for me, where I could be in a sharing of information kind of situation with another being, and then I could be shocked by the realization that they don't actually get what I'm saying. And there was this part of me at the time that was just like putting it on her a bit, but I also knew to take everything as a mirror, so I was looking for it in me, but I never got to the real root cause, because I guess it wasn't just easy for me to find it, and I needed some more reflections of it. So the root cause is that at some point I was misunderstood, and that put me in these kind of fears of being isolated and singled out and excluded from the group. And this definitely did stem from childhood experiences on the playground, where I was excluded, and that continued on as a pain that I was unable to process through many, many, many experiences later in life. Because my coping mechanism to deal with this, it's very peculiar when I look at it. I'm like, that's a very interesting way to cope with that. Was I started having like a vetting process, right? So, and this is not conscious. It's like I'm consciously aware of why I was operating this way now, but at the time I was doing it, I did not know this is what I was doing. What I was doing was I would have a conversation with somebody for the purpose of being understood, not for the purpose of them being understood. I wasn't trying to understand them. I was trying to see if they understood me. So that led to me sharing outwardly, maybe some weird stuff, maybe what I believe, right? Like maybe little pieces of it, right? So I would share a bit of it and then see what their reaction was. So if their reaction was like, okay, and they didn't like blow it out of proportion or, anything weird that would make me go in another direction, they passed my vetting process, and now I would let them be around me. So here's the problem with that. My vetting process was set up so that I could see if people were going to accept me or not in this stuff I knew and who I was and how I am. And because I never set out to understand them, first of all, it's very narcissistic. And second of all, it meant that anyone who saw that about me, whether it was consciously that they saw it about me or unconsciously that they saw it about me because they had the same kind of wound, they could get past my vetting process by just acting like they cared about what I was saying, acting interested, acting like they weren't offended by it. That's as easy as it was. So I could be betrayed very easily. And now Is it really a betrayal? You know, you could look at it from many different layers and many different experiences, and some were and some weren't. But it felt like a betrayal when I would come to the point where I would realize, oh my God, this person doesn't even get it. Oh my God, this person has been letting me believe that they get it, so I would share more and more, but they don't even believe in it. And it would feel so hurtful each time, and then I would just go back to that bolstering myself up. All right, Julie, you know what you know. They just don't get it. Move on. And I would never let myself feel the feelings of hurt that I had over not being understood. And it's funny because one time I was identifying what I wanted most in life, and it was to be understood. And I was in a meditation, a very deep meditation, and I even knew consciously that life wasn't about being understood. We understand ourselves, and the best thing that we can do for others is to understand them. But I also knew that I was dancing around that topic as well, because even though I could understand people from a certain level, right? Like I could understand if they had a wound, why they were acting in a certain way. I could see the root cause of the wound, right? I could understand them on that level, but on the very like gentle surface of who they were trying to be, like I didn't bother with. I wanted to either be dissecting them to who they really were at the core, and helping them become who they are on a soul level. I either wanted to get really down and dirty with them, or I couldn't bother. And that's a tragedy, to be honest, because it's so far off of who I am consciously thinking that I'm being, you know? So this started to break apart for me a week ago or so, where I started unraveling a bunch of stuff, which I can't even like coherently repeat at this time, but I wish I could, because I would certainly share it. But I started to see that I was more able... Oh, it's because when I realized I was bolstering myself up and it was a mask. When I took that mask off, which was just a couple weeks ago, I started to see that I was more interested in other people from a more genuine place. I started to want to understand people. And I knew it was different. I could feel it was different in me. I was like, oh, wow, this is different for me, because I used to not have patience for people's masks. I used to not have patience for people's masks, so I wouldn't even want to look at them. And people want to show you their mask. That's what people want to relate on. That's something where it's comfortable. And it's probably because they're doing the same thing I was doing, which is presenting a mask to see if you're okay with it. And so people who were able to be deep, I think they could hang with me a little bit more than people who were on a shallow level. People who only wanted to be in the mask, those people probably were like, this girl, I didn't pass their test, to get in. And because I wasn't looking at their mask anyway, I could see the deep wounds of reasons why, and I would have every excuse and every compassion for them that I could muster. Like, oh, it's all right. Like, they just can't go deep because they're wounded in that place and they just don't want it to be poked around. Okay. I didn't take it personal. And there was a part of me that wanted to take it personal, but I wouldn't let her. And then, finally I was able to, let myself feel the feelings of taking it personal. To, just cry that out a bit, because it's it felt personal to the child version of me. And maybe it was even personal to the child version of me who just was a kid, who just wanted to, play and be around peers and also not be rejected for her weirdness or whatever, So very interesting. What are some things I learned from this? Well, a lot of this centers around unrequited love and just looking at, I was loved the whole time, right? Because it's loving of me to find a coping mechanism that works for me in the face of those things. And Unrequited love means you love something, but it doesn't love you back. But I feel like unrequited love is a lie. Like, you don't go to relationships to get something. You go to relationships to give. So if I go to a relationship to get understanding, that is narcissism. That's not me being loving. But if I go to relationships to give, which is what I had thought I was doing, then it doesn't matter what they give back or not. As long as I'm not draining myself, as long as I'm giving to myself first and then giving from my overflow, giving is what it's about. I don't need them to give back to me. So unrequited love is a lie in that sense. The only thing unrequited love applies to is when we don't love ourselves. So sometimes you don't get it right? Like the part of me that was hurt, I wasn't being loving to her because I wasn't acknowledging her. But the part of me that wanted to survive, I was acknowledging her, and I was loving her by giving her a coping mechanism, So unrequited love, it's not real, when we're whole, when we're a whole being. It can just feel real to fragments of us. That's one thing that I've learned, okay? And I'm just looking at my notes that I wrote in my journal to kind of work this out, and then I just felt like wanting to share, just because I guess for authenticity and for giving this part of me a voice, and for, helping myself step into my authenticity more, meaning like masks off, this connection issue that I've been working on. I've still been working on it. Here's where I'm at on it. I haven't fully figured it out, but I do see that will become more clear now that I've let myself have the emotion of being without that. Because that part of me needed to be loved through her feeling of that. And that feeling is sadness because of lack of connection, right? Like when I go to somebody and I tell them something, and then they kind of like don't want to talk to me anymore, right? I've vetted them. They have failed the process. But there's still a part of me that feels sad about that, right? But then I wasn't letting that part of me be. I was just saying, well, we've got, we know what we're doing here, so shake it off. But there's a part of me that knows we're connected to everybody, so who was genuinely sad and who needed to have the time to be sad about that. Like this is just my process at this time. I don't know that it'll always be that way. I think this is just because I have this wound, right? Like I won't always need to navigate in such a way that I need to make room for every person who rejects me to feel all the emotion that goes with that, because I don't think that's a thing. I think that it's particularly happening in my situation so that I can heal this wound, which was lodged in me in childhood, specifically in childhood, and affected my inability or ability to socialize since then. The only, times I would find myself in social settings is amongst people who are doing drugs or drinking. Why? Because they're all wearing masks. And it was just like, I knew I wasn't going to be having close connection with people, and I could just kind of be there. It wasn't as threatening. It didn't feel as rejecting. If they rejected me, it's like, well, they're rejecting themselves anyway. So fear of being excluded is the thing that comes with a fear of connection, fear of a lack of connection. If I'm not connecting to someone, I will be excluded from the group. And instead, I excluded myself from the group in a lot of times, in a lot of ways. So it's interesting how, you can look at these things from a lot of different angles, and you can see that I do, and just the way that I talk, I'll be looking at one angle and then the next and then the next, and so I don't know if that's hard to follow or not, but basically what it comes down to is that, you know, in the wholeness of who I am, collecting all these like hurt parts, and the parts that put a mask on, and the parts that wanted to survive, and the parts that wanted to be connected, it's like all of that is me. All of that is me. And I'm allowed to be here, and I'm allowed to be bad at some things, and I'm allowed to fail, and I'm allowed to move through it. And I think another thing that I had to come to as I was taking off the mask a couple weeks ago, whenever that was, I realized like, oh, I'm gonna disappoint some people, right? I'm not gonna pass the test of some people's vetting process. That was terrifying and scary to me, right? Because my ultimate wish was to be understood. So, but now I'm just kind of more like, all right, I'm getting better with it, right? Spirit has just shown me a specific situation with us, the same soulmate, that I was pushed towards many times, just kind of recapping the situation so that I could see it from different ways, and just seeing that that person probably has a vetting process as well. I did not pass the vetting process and was rejected. And that was an interesting thing to understand. And it was also painful because, like, on a soul level, that's like someone very important to me. So it's just so weird, right, that you can come into Earth and then like play these parts for each other that put you at such odds. And also like that this person's vetting process makes me the bad guy, and all the things that I did look like manipulations and stuff, and it was but it didn't mean to be. It was because I was wearing a mask. I needed to manipulate others into believing the mask that I was manipulating myself into believing, because I had the wound, because I didn't want to be the weak, hurt person who needed to be accepted. So it's interesting that my mask got me rejected from the vetting process of someone who was really important to me. And I don't know what else I could have done, because I was, I just didn't have the skills yet for socialization in a real way with other people who are intelligent and not out of their friggin' minds on drugs, So this has been a real humbling process, but I do feel like it's good process. And also when you look at the topic of connection, this is just one angle of it, right, that I'm covering. My particular angle that I needed to work on is this. So it's not like when we study connection that I've covered all the topics of it, right? It's just my particular issues or whatever, my particular areas of study, let's call it. So a lot of this just came from the idea of me asking myself, what kind of fun things do I want to do? And then there was this part of me that's eh. And I was well, why? And then I had to go and get in touch with this inner child part of me to ask what, why, what? And basically she was just I'd rather just be alone. I didn't want to risk it. I don't really want to risk being understood or teased or excluded. I don't want to deal with people who are unpredictable, that I don't know. And this was all because the way that I was operating was that I didn't take the time to understand somebody as my way of introducing myself to them as a person who cares to understand them. I didn't do that. And it was all coping mechanisms. It was all survival techniques. And it's so backwards. But I've always said, in the very beginning, and I hadn't said it for a while because I hadn't found it to be true for a while, but in the beginning, if you haven't been following my journey from the beginning, then you don't know, or you may not know, but I had a breakdown. That's what started my spiritual journey, like a complete breakdown. And I would say, and this was during the time when I was doing all the magic with Spirit, and Spirit was teaching me great stuff, and I would do these talks on YouTube at some of my very first videos, and I would say I had the benefit of having terrible coping mechanisms because they crumbled. And then, I could see. And it's true, and it had been a while since I had realized a real terrible coping mechanism. Like most of the coping mechanisms that I've been working on in recent times had been more like it's working, but like it's also in a subtle way not working. This is so blatant. This is so big and in my face. I could not see it. I would see it after interactions with people that, okay, I definitely didn't do it right. But maybe because I was always like the single one going into a group setting, I didn't have a friend with me that would say like, well, you did this, or you know what I mean? Like I didn't have anyone I could trust, and I didn't have anyone who cared about me enough to come and say it to me and give me that feedback. I had to fumble my way through, but I do want to give credit to the graciousness of those who let me into their group setting in order to fumble, right? Because I wouldn't have had these recollections of myself to reflect on and see where I went wrong and see where I was operating and how it was all working for me. But I definitely would go into those group settings after I had been rejected by a few members of it, or a couple, or a few, 2 to 3 at times, members of the group. A couple, one of them was just kind of standoffish, and then a couple were kind of like pretending. I could tell they were pretending, but I was also okay with it in a way. I didn't want to be mean or call them out. They were very well liked by the group and all that. And I felt I was the outsider. But anyway, I would after I knew that about those people, they were kind of not into me, I would kind of keep myself bolstered up to go into the group setting. And then I would just keep myself remembering and reminding myself that I know that Spirit led me here. I know what I know. I there's a higher meaning. There's a higher purpose of this. I can do this. I'm not in danger. I'm safe. I've got my own back. Those kind of things, which is a terrible way to socialize. It's a terrible way to socialize because if you go into a group setting, I did want to befriend people. I did want to talk to people, and I would do that, but I would do it on a very light level. I would keep it surfacey. I would just be friendly with them. And it's not my setting, really. I like being one-on-one with somebody. I like talking intimately about deeper topics with somebody. So sometimes I would be allowed to do readings in those settings, and that would be good for me because then I'm one-on-one with somebody, and now we're talking about something deeper, something I'm very comfortable in. I'll go into your psyche, I'll go into your subconscious, and I'll go into your soul. I can do that all day. This mask business that we're all gonna wear, I don't fucking know about that. But my mask would be off during those times. So if anyone were to sit down with me during those times, I think they could definitely feel my authenticity. And so for that reason, the ones that would sit with me, I think they knew and understood that there was, I did have an ability and a talent. So maybe they thought this bolstering up of myself was just my natural confidence to that. But it wasn't. Because I'm more inclined to be soft, gentle, and not bolstered. I'm more inclined to be I want to be just one of us, I don't want to I don't want to try to puff up my chest. I don't want to try to act proud or like I'm special or anything like that. And I think that by putting on the mask to encourage myself that I was confident enough to be there, it would seem like that, right? It would seem like I was acting better than I am, because I was putting on a mask. But in actuality, I am that good. You know? It's kind of funny. It's like the thing that was between my mask and the real me was a pain. A real pain body that I was not acknowledging. And it was keeping me from socializing in an appropriate way, which would have been to, first of all, be authentic and genuine about who I am and how I am, and be okay if people didn't jive with that, but also be authentically interested in others, you know? Give others my presence, my care, my want to understand. That's what I had to offer others that I wasn't able to give because it wasn't part of my mask and I was too hurt to risk it. So because I operated in this way over the years, not particularly in this group, but in a lot of other places before I came to that group, I was betrayed by friends, like over and over and over, and I wouldn't know who to trust. And even in small ways, even just friends who would talk to me but then go talk to their friend about me. Like, that seems like nothing in our culture, but that's everything to me. A person like me, oh, especially with that wound, no. I would walk away from people if there was a hint of it, and there was a lot of hints. And it's possible that I cut people off that weren't doing anything bad or wrong, but the fact that they would not open themselves to me made it too uncomfortable to keep them in my sphere. So I wanted to be around people who I didn't have to wear the mask around, basically. And my vetting process for that, like how are you going to be okay with me being weird, was to just be weird to them. And I didn't do that inauthentically, though. I didn't plan it out. I didn't like say, ooh, I'm going to say this weird thing. No, it just came out. It was just like, it was just part of it all. Like, like I didn't plan it. Like, those were genuinely me weird things, like, you know, about life that I had experienced. It wasn't like I was making things up or trying to be outlandish or dramatizing anything. It wasn't like that at all. So it's really subtle, these things that I'm realizing about myself. I just didn't like to feel vulnerable. And so when I was in that group setting, instead of feeling vulnerable, there wasn't really anyone in particular in the group who would have been more, who I felt like wanted to know me on a deeper level, but maybe that's because of the way I approached them, not wanting to know them on a deeper level, which I did feel like I already knew them on a deeper level, but they knew I hadn't come through their mask, so I didn't go through their vetting process. I just could see their fucking soul. It's rude in a way, but it was like all I known my whole life. I just didn't know how to fit in socially, and I didn't have good examples because I went into groups where it was drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms. So those are not good social ways of socializing. That's just like, you know, what you learn in those social circles of drugs and alcohol, and, you know, like, it's like that's probably people are going to rip you off, or they're ripping each other off, that you shouldn't tell on anyone. You should just keep your fucking mouth shut, keep your stuff safe, and not trust anyone. And it was like, oh yeah, you know, fit right in here because I don't trust anyone. I wanted so much to trust someone, right? Like, it was all I wanted. Very interesting experience that I've had, and from my perspective anyway. I don't know if it is helpful for you to reflect on these things, whether or not it's to understand a situation that you have been in, someone that you know, or if you knew me and you needed to understand more about me as a person and why I present the way I have up until now. That's why. So another thing that I'm facing now is I can't decipher when someone is forgivable and when I need to cut them off. That's a difficult thing for me because I do have this understanding that we can change, right? Like, I've done nothing but change for years and years and years. The people around me have done nothing but change, and it's like, so someone who tells me I'm changing, I watch that and then they don't change, and it's like, well, they really seem to want to, though. Like, they did do some efforts. I saw that. It was subtle. Maybe it was just even a wish that they wanted to change, but they don't know how. It's like, how... Like, God forgives us eternally. And I'm aiming to embody Christ consciousness. And I know that Christ consciousness is forgiving, but not stupid, right? Like, I'm not going to just, like, open myself up to be blatantly betrayed by someone who is giving me lip service about their intentions on behaving better in a way that doesn't abuse me or whatever. But I have had a difficulty with that particular thing because I know that it's possible, and I know their soul, and I know I can see the anchor of the wound. And it's like, to me, it's like, okay, you just gotta make that little jump. You just gotta, like, connect these things. You can do it. Like, to me, it looks like you can do it. So why wouldn't I expect that you can do it? But there's something in my operating and watching that was skipping over the part of them that didn't have any intention of actually doing it, which was their mask. I was ignoring masks all this time. So that was another way that operating system that I was in played out. I could see the potential in people much more clearly than I could see their intentions. Because it's all forgivable. It's all forgivable in God's eyes. So I was thinking that a good gauge would be people who show they don't care about themselves will not be able to care about me, and therefore can't be trusted. Then I was like, that's a lot of people. Like, and then I was like, where would I find people who care about themselves? And I was like, the gym. I was like, oh yeah, the gym. Those people care about themselves. I could go to the gym. And I was like, well, some people go to the gym just for their image, or just because they think it's what they're supposed to do. So, all right, that's not quite clear, right? That's not quite cut and dry. It's not everybody at the gym is going to be loving themselves or caring about themselves. And then I thought, spring water. Oh, when I go to the spring, those people care about themselves for the most part. They're doing something healthy. Some of them need the water, So, it could be other reasons they're there. And then I was like, oh, people who care about themselves do fun things. Ah, back to that original question, right? When I asked my inner child, what kind of fun stuff do you want to do? And my inner child was like, It was because my inner child was used to me not caring about it the way it felt. Because my inner child was harboring a hurt feeling about not being understood. And until I honored that hurt feeling in me about being misunderstood, my inner child was too depressed and too melancholic to think of doing something fun. And so throughout all this kind of dissection of my own coping mechanisms and masks and operating system and beliefs and desires and longings, I've realized that I needed to honor that part of me that was hurt before I could let that part of me that wants to do fun things out again. Because when I'm doing something fun, I'm caring about myself, and then if other people are out there doing the fun thing too, chances are they care about themselves too. You know, it depends on the fun thing. Of course, some people can do fun things for other reasons. It's possible. But the majority, I would say, I'll be in the right direction to meet people who are doing things for fun. Oh, I just thought of another fun thing. I was making a list of fun things that I know to do, and I just flashed to paintball. I used to do paintball with my family, and we've had some fun times doing that. Painful. It was kind of hurty. But still fun. I have 3 sons, so doing paintball, it was it's just something I could really participate in with them that they enjoyed very much. And they're, gamers, all of them. So paintball is right up our alley. I'm going to look into some more of that. Okay, so that's where I am on connection and dissecting certain coping mechanisms and patterns of the young rejected child.